my first step ever podcast, and I am Ishani Nigam, your host and producer of the podcast. This podcast is made for all the disruptors around the globe who know that they are made for something, for that one thing, but fear of embarrassment, fear of rejection, the fear of fear itself holds us back at some point in time. But hey, those are the only milestones that if we cross, we are there to take our first steps. So, welcome on this journey with me where I interview people from across the globe so that they can share their story, their challenges, and you know that even you can surpass yours. Well, what are you waiting for? Let's get started. This podcast is all about the amazing hidden stories, probably stories that you know a little bit about, and we deep dive into the aspect of the stories that made them who they are, why they are what they do, and what really gets them to do every day what they're doing today. Everyone has a story, and here we are to kind of dig deep to understand what really keeps them going on to take their first steps so that you, my friends, can build that conviction and know that your actions, consistent actions, will take you to your first step. So please join me in welcoming Peter Winneke all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome on my first step, Peter.
Thanks, Ishani. Terrific to be here.
I am excited as well. And given that you have done some really interesting and offbeat sort of a work in your life, I feel, and the amazing book that you have written, which encapsulates everything that you have experienced, learned, and you're willing to share, we will talk a lot about your mindset, but where you really come from. Let me give a sneak peek about you to my listeners today. So, Peter Winneke, author of Give While You Live, is a generosity and life legacy advisor with more than 20 years experience in strategic, impactful giving, establishing more than 100 philanthropic family foundations. Now, this is quite an offbeat, I think, journey, career progression, I would say, because generally what we hear people do is business, which is amazing, but kind of, translating that into something that can be really impactful out there is amazing. For also for our listeners to understand what are the different careers, what are the different pathways that they can really shape their interests, their experience into is very interesting. And as well as being the inaugural CEO of Australia's largest grant-making family foundation, Peter has served Australia's philanthropy sector with the Myer Foundation, Sydney Myer Fund, the Catherine Freeman Foundation, Philanthropy Australia, and a lot more. While the book Give While You Live shines a light on best practice of giving, Peter also produces and provides a constructive critique of the philanthropic sector and Australia's giving culture that we would love to kind of know and delve deep into, and providing a guide on how we can significantly improve practices within the sector. Now, we're going to get to know all about that eventually in the podcast as we go forward. But before that, let's go back to that amazing Peter who was all brilliant, growing up with ideas and the people while he was a little kid. So, Peter, please take us through your surroundings.
Yeah. Look, thanks, Ishani. That's a lovely intro. Look, I think I was just a normal sort of kid. I was not a brilliant academic, but reasonably good, and I was fairly shy when I was younger. But I was surrounded by two sets of grandparents, and both parents who always were making some sort of contribution to the community. Now, as a young guy, a 10 or 12-year-old, I didn't think too deeply about that, but I think that was just that entrenched in the back of my brain as I was growing up. At my maternal grandmother, we would go around to her house, and she would be reading into a microphone these voluminous legal texts. And I would ask her, I was 10 or 12, I'd say, Nana, why are you doing that? And she was reading these into a microphone so that vision impaired students could study law. Now,
Wow.
as a 10 or 12-year-old, I thought that was, okay, that's interesting. I didn't dwell on it. It wasn't until later on I realised that, that incredible compassion and willingness to serve. I also had a great grandfather who was a well-known Scottish Presbyterian minister who was a missionary, trying to convert the cannibals in New Hebrides, now Vanuatu. So it was sort of interesting growing up listening to these stories. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and I didn't work that out much later. But I think that was the bit of the background, Shani, of lots of interesting things happening around me.
That certainly does sound like that. And I think you had very interesting characters to say so in your story, if I can say that, to
Mm.
begin with, because they had a lot of conviction, purpose. They were working towards something, and it had a lot of meaning attached to what they were doing. As you rightly said, that really did not kind of, you know, probably outright impact you in many ways, but subconsciously I think it was kind of,
Yes.
settling in within you. At that point in time, you were growing up, you had a lot of other things to kind of care about, and this is where it gets interesting. So we would like to know, Peter, like when you were in your university time, when you were growing up at that point in time, what really kept you busy, what were your interests, and more than that, what did you really think about yourself and the world? Because this is the time where our listeners are very, very confused about a lot of things in life.
Well, look, in my 20s, Ashani, I was really drifting a bit. I was making a number of decisions by the process of elimination. I mean, I got to year 10 and you've got to decide what do you do the next couple of years. Do you do sciences or humanities? I fell into humanities because I didn't enjoy the sciences, and then I fall into a commerce degree. And then I fall into doing insolvency services at a big worldwide accounting firm. I didn't sort of, I didn't have career goals. And as I reflect back, and I say this to other younger people, I wish I'd sought out mentors back then. When I was close to my dad, but and he was helpful. But I think you need non-family mentors. And if I was going around again, I'd be seeking out mentors because I did drift through the 20s, and then yeah, as I said, I was doing insolvency services at a big accounting firm. That was for about 8 years, and I probably could have chopped a few years off that and gone and done something else.
It's quite interesting. I think when we look back, we can definitely make sense of things. But as I hear you speak, that you were going with the flow.
Mm,
And for a lot of people, it sort of does work out, in the end, because once you're going with the flow, you experiment with things. But only once you get very intentional about things, which I think you did towards the end of couple of years from there,
yeah,
things start working out for you. But
yeah.
before we move on from this phase of your life, I really kind of want to ask you that today, if you look back and if you think there was one thing that Peter thought about, that life, this was the idea that he had about life, and which is not true at all, what would that be, one thing? And if you'd like to share with our listeners today.
Yeah, look, Shani, interesting. Not one incident, but over many years during my 20s, I would go backpacking. Melbourne's a nice city to live in, but it's cold in the winter. And
Very.
I would put my boots on and my backpack and go backpacking to low to middle income countries. And I wasn't doing this to save the world. After university, I had travel with a mate from uni, as Aussies and Kiwis do. We'd spent 6 months in Europe and the west coast of the States. So I'd done that. But after that, every year I'd go to a low middle income country for 3 to 4 weeks in the middle of the year just for a bit of adventure. But it was years of this travel, Ashani, that sort of, and this is where some of my activities from my forebears sort of started to, they were percolating in my head. What do I want to do with my life? And these travels, I actually saw the real world, and I could see that there's a lot of inequality and a lot of injustice in the world. And at the same time, I had glimpses of what the philanthropic sector could try and do in terms of addressing some of that injustice and inequality. So that for me was, so it wasn't one incident, it wasn't one moment. It was sort of slowly over a number of years. It actually changed my life, getting out of the comfort zone and seeing the real world.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Peter. I would also say that it definitely depends on a person's ability to observe and understand, take things in, and reflect on it, and try to kind of make some sort of understanding out of it to do something good. So I would definitely put that onus on you, that you did take the time to reflect and understand that what can be done.
Yeah,
And as I see that you have really amazing 16 years experience in the corporate world, specializing in insolvency, in mergers and acquisitions. Now, before you move to this amazing field and this amazing initiative that you are in right now, I would kind of like to know a bit more about, if you are able to maybe take us through the top three things that you reckon has really made you the person that you are from the experience that you gained from this 16 years, because I believe every experience that we have really really builds your character. So
Yeah.
what would you like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, I think the first point, Ashani, would be to get out of the comfort zone. I mean, I enjoyed my travel to low to middle income countries, but it's definitely getting out of the comfort zone. A lot of this was back before before mobile telephones, so nobody really knew where you were or what you were doing. I mean, sometimes I was often travelling with a friend or a girlfriend, sometimes on my own, but you had to sort out any issues that sort of jumped out at you. So to get out of the comfort zone, I think, is good, and see how just meet other people, and when you do that, really open the eyes and close the mouth a bit, and ask questions, and then close the mouth and listen and learn. That would be and that was transformational for me. And then secondly, I think just researching. I mean, this is where I developed, the idea that I really I enjoyed the corporate world and I learnt a lot, but I really started to seek more purpose in my life. So that's when the second point I'd say is I started researching, okay, I've got these commercial skills. How can I use those in the for purpose space so that, I was really thinking we spend such a high percentage of our life at work. I needed to have more purpose in my day to day job. I was fundraising for years as I was working in the corporate world, but that wasn't enough. It was fun, and we raised a lot of money with various people. But I needed to have a role which had more purpose. And then I guess the third point would be I think discipline is sort of an underrated issue. I mean, we've all seen people with loads of talent, whether it be academic or sporting wise or work wise. Talent really doesn't mean a lot. It's the discipline. The discipline to think through, well, what am I doing? What am I seeing? Where do I want to get to? How do I get there? And to follow through on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. And I'm lucky because I think it's partly because I'm a reasonably intelligent person, but I'm not super smart. Some of these people around me, they're smarter than me academically. That's okay. If I can apply myself, and coming back to the discipline, I hadn't sort of thought through that. It was only when I was reading Jim Collins, his real focus, the author Jim Collins, his real focus on discipline in the for-profit world and the for-purpose world. And that's when it sunk into me that actually I've been applying that. I just sort of hadn't really put a label to it.
Peter, that's very interesting to hear you, the way things have been for you in your journey. I really see that you've been through the flow in life, but there did come a point where you started kind of, realizing things because you were very observant and you were aware of your strengths and what you would like to put them to the use and not just be where you are, which is quite interesting because a lot of us youngsters or people even who want to start second innings in life, they realize that they have a lot of talent or probably experience that really compels them to do that thing that they feel that it will impact a lot of people, help a lot of people, or let alone, let's say, just them, help them live a better life, which is also very important. But making that shift, pulling up that gear is very very challenging. So we would love to understand what went behind the scenes of your first step, dabbling into the philanthropic field. Can you take us through the time when you were like, okay, fine, I have these ideas, I can make sense of things, but what now? How do I go about doing things?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I had sort of, as I said, touched on earlier, I'd recognised the ability for philanthropy to address some of the injustice and inequality in the world. So again, coming back to the discipline, I really applied my mind to it. I still work in the corporate world at this point. I'm working out what's my next step. I did a huge amount of research each night at home or on the philanthropic sector in Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, Europe. So I learnt a lot through that process. And then I started cold calling senior people in the philanthropic sector in Melbourne and Sydney. Shani, this is sort of around 2002, and the philanthropic sector, it's not large in Australia now. Back then it was tiny. So it wasn't as if I had 50 people to call up, but so I sort of pinpointed the key players. They were all kind enough to meet with me, and I would just make sure that I picked their brain, and I was really seeking what are the opportunities in the sector, and I had sort of what I realised early on, Shani, was that the sector was small, and I wanted to find a way that I could use my commercial skills. There's no point me going to paint fences or things like that because I'm hopeless at that stuff, and then someone's got to come and rectify it and pay a professional to fix it. How can I use my commercial skills which would maximise impact? And I had this sort of really naive notion. Actually, I can't see professionals in the philanthropic sector trying to drive its growth. And so this is 2 decades ago. And back then I'm thinking we've created staggering wealth in this country. Of course, in the 2 decades since we've created a lot more wealth. But I thought that was my light bulb moment. If I'm going to get in the sector and somehow drive its growth. I had no idea how I was going to do that, but I saw an opportunity. So that's all when I was talking to people, sort of testing them. Where are the opportunities to grow the sector here? And so that's where it really kick-started.
This is interesting. So, if I can just kind of quickly touch upon one question, was this somewhere in your late 30s, early 40s? What
Yeah. No,
timeline?
I was about 34, 35.
This is interesting because if listeners, if you are kind of glued to this conversation so far, I like you to kind of notice how at any age, when you really are restless and you really find purpose that you want to kind of solve, this is exactly how you go about things. You take action. I think, Peter, what you mentioned, that you just started, made a list of the people you want to cold call. You're being very strategic over here,
Yeah,
and you were very, very well prepared. As you mentioned, that you were ready to pick their brain. That means you knew that what you wanted to get out of the conversation, and it was a field which was, I think, still gaining momentum, as you said, at that
correct.
point in
It was
time.
still small. Yeah,
Yeah, so it was a new field, and it's so relevant. Even if anyone wants to start sort of a business, or if they want to get in a different kind of a profession these days, there's so much that's changing in the market right now anywhere in the world. These are the few steps that Peter mentioned in his journey, which you can actually extract and transition in generalize that for yourself and kind of go ahead. So, Peter, thank you so much, for sharing. And I think a very fierce approach and a very purposeful approach, I would say, as well, which was very interesting. So that's how I think the wheel started turning around for you. And then what happened? We would love to know, how did the first foundation came into effect, and what happened after that?
well, then it was interesting because my passion was to grow the philanthropic sector, and this position came up as finance and administration manager of the Myer Foundation, based in Melbourne, the Myer retailing family.
Very big.
And I thought, well, I mean, they had at the time the strongest philanthropic brand in Australia was Myer. But their mission wasn't to grow the sector. That they were doing a number of interesting things in the arts and in the environment and in the social welfare space. So I had these 2 sleepless nights, Shani, of look, that's an interesting job, but I don't want to be a finance manager. I want to, and their mission is not to grow the sector. Um, and there are a couple of other opportunities bubbling along, which were sector growth opportunities. I had 2 sleepless nights, and I woke up and thought, actually, Peter, you've done loads of research on the philanthropic sector, but you've never worked in it. Take a backward step, go and be the finance and administrator at the Myer Foundation. Spend 2 years with the Myer family, who at that stage had about 7 decades of giving experience. Learn the ropes there over a couple of years, and then you can go off to some other body which is charged with growing the sector. So I joined the Myer Foundation, spent a year and a half there, and then I stayed in the same office, but I moved across to the Myer family office, which is a multi-family office, and I established the Myer Family Philanthropic Services team. So I sort of created my own business, if you like, carefully using that Myer brand. So I had stumbled into one of the best places in Australia to do what I wanted to do. Use that Myer brand, set up a philanthropic service, and share the philanthropic learnings with them.
Incredible. So, Peter, for our listeners who are not very well versed with the philanthropic sector as such, or they're still kind of wanting to learn a bit more, we would like to kind of, for you to kind of help us understand what's involved in this, and how can someone get into this if they like.
So and I might do that, Ashani, in the context of what I was doing at the Myer Philanthropic Services. What we were doing, so I built a small team there over the following years, basically talking to high net worth families around, okay, looks like you've got more than enough. here's an idea. You might want to share some of that wealth. So slice off X% of the wealth. It wasn't for us to tell them what that X% should be. Let's work out what you're trying to do with your giving, and then we can. There are various philanthropic structures. We can then establish the correct structure for you. And then most of the families we work with, Ashani, there was a mum and dad and 2 or 4 kids. We would then encourage those families. We would often run a philanthropic vision workshop with those families. So we would get mum and dad and the kids. So it's important that the kids had were involved, so they had an authentic voice. We would get them to do a bit of, before the workshop, a bit of pre-work around their individual values, their family values, their aspirations for the foundation, what upsets them in the world. And then we would bring them together in a room. We would analyse that homework that they were doing, essentially. And then a couple of weeks later, we would bring them into a room for a half-day workshop. And the aim of that was to walk through sort of an informal but a structured process of determining, as a collective unit, the family, what are they passionate about? And then we would encourage them just to pick 1 or 2 areas, and that can be their focus for their giving. And then the next few hours, we would talk about the types of areas that they would give to. Then we would document that, and that would be their sort of draft giving strategy. And just one other point, Ashani, is that what we found, and I quickly learned actually the best way, because selling philanthropy is pretty hard.
Yeah, sounds like one.
Yeah, but I quickly determined the best way to do that was to say to mum and dad, a family foundation can be an extraordinary educational tool for the next generation, because the kids are learning about how to set a vision and a mission for something. I mean, a family foundation is a microcosm of a business. It just happens to be in the business of grant making. So the family as a collective unit are having a bit of fun determining, well, what's our vision here? What do we want to do? There are governance learnings for the kids, for investment strategies, because whether the foundation's got $1 million in it or $10 million, it's got finite resources. The kids are learning about how to set a strategy to achieve the mission, and then how to measure impact. So lots of learnings.
Yes, definitely. It sounds very interesting, but as you rightly have said, it is a very difficult task to kind of, get around families with good network to kind of educate them about how they can utilize their wealth to, help people around, make an
Yeah,
impact, but also make it their own, which
yeah,
is quite challenging yet interesting and impactful task that you have at hand. So first of
yeah.
all, thank you so much, Peter, for being so humble and kind to explain that to a lot of us over here. Peter, thank you so much for, taking us through your journey, the little Peter who grew around some amazing grandparents and great grandparents
Yeah.
who showed him the light. And now that after a couple of years, gaining your own experience, having your own story, you are creating that impact with all different fundraising workshops that you have done with the families and what they're doing, setting out in the world, because this is so important. Having that human value at any level in the business is very, very important. So before we take your leave, I would really like to know from you, given that you have such extraordinary experience and I think you've been extremely humble on the show, I like to kind of understand if there was ever an experience in your understanding, workshopping it with any of these families that you mentioned, that was like your light bulb moment, or you felt like this is exactly why I do this job and I love it.
Well, the philanthropic vision workshops, Ashani, we ran with families. I mean, we must have, when I was there, we set up over 100 family foundations, and the majority of those families we would run the workshop with. There wasn't a bad one, and that's not me being arrogant. It's just that they were such unique conversations. We often got letters and phone calls from parents in the following days saying that, Peter, that's one of the best conversations we've had as a collective family unit. So that, there was immense satisfaction getting families to start their philanthropic journey. So that was incredibly satisfying.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing that on my first step ever. And before we take your leave, I always request our guest speakers to leave our listeners with a quote or a saying that they really resonate with.
Well, Shani, I'm not a country and western music fan as such, but Casey Chambers, the Australian singer, she wrote a beautiful song years ago called Ignorance. Don't listen to the song after a bad day at work, Ashani. It's not an uplifting song, but it's a beautiful song. And look, there's a line in the song which really resonated with me many years ago when I first heard it. If you're not pissed off with the world, you're not paying attention.
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah, yeah, it is. So that was I heard that because, as you know, these sort of things have got to resonate at the right time. And I heard this when I was searching for more purpose in my life, and I thought, righto, how can I make more people pay attention?
And I think you have just done that today. So thank you so much for being on my first step ever, for talking to us with sheer enthusiasm and sharing a bit of your journey, which is probably very personal, professional, yet very important for our listeners to understand that what it really takes to own your own story and keep going on, find the ways, take action, which is the most important bit, and keep going on. So thank you so much, Peter, for being on my first step ever. And for all my listeners out there, if you're interested to know a bit more about Peter's book, Give While You Live, I would love to leave a link in the show notes and more about Peter if you would like to know more about what he does. So just watch out for that very, very soon. So thank you so much, Peter, for being on my first step ever. Please do give ratings and please do write your comments. And you can directly reach out to me on my first step ever _IN. That's my Instagram handle. A little about myself. I have always loved performing on stage, acting, speaking, and just emoting myself. So I use these medium different ways so that I can connect with people, help them, empower them, infotain them, which is to inform them and entertain them. If you would like to collaborate for any opportunities, more than welcome to connect with me on my Instagram handle. Thank you.